Before the 4th century BCE, the pursuit of truth often meant looking away from the physical world. If you followed the teachings of Plato, the dirt beneath your feet was a shadow, a flawed imitation of a higher, perfect realm of forms. Aristotle approached the world differently. Born in the Macedonian city of Stygira, he was the son of a court physician. From a young age, he was raised to respect observable biological realities, the actual mechanics of living things. He spent 20 years studying at Plato's academy in Athens. He absorbed his master's teachings, but his biological background made him skeptical of a universe governed entirely by abstract mathematics and mystical ideals. That tension between heavenly perfection and earthly observation pushed him to pioneer an entirely new way of knowing. He decided that if we want to understand reality, we have to start by looking closely at the things right in front of us. When Plato died, the academy moved even further toward abstract math. Aristotle left Athens, entering a period of self-imposed exile, first in Assos and then on the island of Lesbos. There, he turned his attention to the tidal pools. Working alongside his collaborator, Theophrastus, he spent hours in the water and the mud, observing marine life. They dissected marine animals, tracked their reproductive cycles, and grouped them by their shared anatomical features. This hands-on process of cataloging flora and fauna effectively birthed the practice of biological taxonomy. He realized that true scientific knowledge, what he called episteme, didn't come from contemplating another dimension. It had to be built up, step by step, from observable facts. He was severing science from mysticism. In 343 BCE, King Philip II of Macedon summoned Aristotle back to court. His task was to serve as the personal tutor to a young prince, the boy who would eventually become Alexander the Great. Years later, when Alexander assumed the throne and Macedonian influence secured Athens, Aristotle returned to the city. He founded his own school, the Lyceum. There, he assembled the first great library of antiquity and created a hub for systematic research across dozens of disciplines. His tenure lasted until Alexander's sudden death. Facing a surge of anti-Macedonian sentiment, Aristotle fled Athens, famously remarking that he would not let the city sin twice against philosophy. He died in exile shortly after. His physical journey ended in Chalcis, but the work conducted at the Lyceum left behind something massive, a comprehensive metaphysical framework designed to decode the structure of reality itself. At the core of that framework is a concept called hylomorphism. Aristotle argued that every physical object is an inseparable composite of two things: matter, the physical stuff it is made of, and form, the structural blueprint that makes it what it is. Again, he breaks with Plato. A form doesn't float around in some separate, ideal dimension. The form of a horse is physically embedded inside the living, breathing horse. This dual concept addressed the paradox of change. By dividing an object into matter and form, Aristotle allowed for an underlying substance to persist while its outward properties shifted. He explained this through potentiality and actuality. A lump of raw bronze has the potential to be a statue. The matter is there. It only becomes an actual statue when the sculptor imposes a specific form onto it. By locking matter and form together, Aristotle showed that reality is not a static illusion. It is a dynamic, measurable process of becoming. But observing that things change is only the first step. Aristotle asserted that to claim true scientific knowledge of an object, you must answer 4 distinct questions. He called these the 4 causes. First is the material cause. What is the physical stuff it's made of? Second is the formal cause. What is its structural design or definition? Third is the efficient cause. What is the kinetic force or creator that brought it into existence? And fourth is the final cause, or telos. What is its ultimate purpose? When you can answer all 4, you understand the object completely. This matrix provided a definitive vocabulary for rigorous scientific explanation that dominated Western thought until the modern era. The most distinctive of those 4 is the final cause. Aristotle believed that not just human artifacts, but all of the natural world is inherently goal-directed. This exact view is known as teleology. Think about an acorn. It doesn't grow randomly. It actively strives toward its internal, natural goal of reaching oakhood. An artifact like a chair only has a purpose because a human carpenter gave it one, but living things possess their purpose internally. Nature builds structures and systems to achieve specific ends, acting like a careful housekeeper. Viewing the physical world through this teleological lens allowed Aristotle to look at a tidal pool and see past the biological chaos. He saw a highly ordered, rational system where every organism was working toward its natural end. If every plant and animal has a built-in purpose, that raises an immediate question. What is the ultimate telos of a human being? Aristotle's ethical answer is eudaimonia. It's a state of complete flourishing, excellence, and long-term happiness. According to Aristotle, we can only achieve eudaimonia by actively exercising the highest, most unique faculty we possess, our capacity for rational thought. Because this rational excellence is nurtured through shared education and the structure of law, flourishing is impossible in isolation. The individual reaches their highest state only as a member of the polis, where active participation in political life provides the necessary context for moral excellence. After the fall of antiquity, the bulk of Aristotle's writings faded from view, completely lost to the Latin West for centuries. The texts survived because they were preserved, translated, and deeply analyzed by scholars in the Arabic-speaking Islamic world. Islamic thinkers like Avicenna and Averroes so revered his systematic logic and rigorous classifications that they referred to him simply as the first teacher. Through these extensive Arabic commentaries, Aristotle's work eventually re-entered Western Europe in the 12th century. His ideas profoundly shaped the theology and philosophy of medieval figures like Thomas Aquinas. Whenever we classify a species, demand empirical proof, or seek an object's purpose, we are using the tools Aristotle built 2 millennia ago. He provided the foundational architecture for how we perceive and explain the world. Before Aristotle, Greek thinkers struggled to establish a coherent map of reality. The physical environment appeared unpredictable, and theories explaining it were entirely fragmented. Parmenides presented a paralyzing argument. Genuine change in the universe is an illusion, resting on the logic that something cannot be created from nothing. Plato offered a different explanation. He argued that the physical objects we experience are merely temporary shadows, projections of a higher realm of perfect forms. Aristotle rejected both the denial of change and the reliance on an invisible, separate realm. He treated sense perception and the concrete material objects around us as the true starting point for investigation. Without a reliable system to process observations or measure the material world, rigorous scientific inquiry was stalled. A strict set of rules for human thought had to be built first. At his school, the Lyceum, Aristotle proposed that before investigating the universe, we must understand the mechanics of cognition. He authored the Organon, a collection of logical treatises engineered to serve as an intellectual instrument for all future scientific disciplines. The engine of this system is the deduction. When accepted premises are laid down, they force a specific conclusion to follow. This is guaranteed entirely by the shared structural link, the middle term, that bridges the two premises. This established the standard for episteme, true scientific knowledge. It was no longer enough to observe that a fact was true. A researcher had to demonstrate the underlying causes that made it necessarily so. With an invincible method for deductive logic forged, Aristotle turned this instrument toward the physical environment. Testing these logical tools required observing physical materials, much like stepping into a sculptor's workshop to watch an object take shape. Here, Aristotle formulated hylomorphism, the doctrine that every physical entity is a compound of two distinct principles. The first principle is matter, the raw, unshaped substrate that carries the sheer potential to become a specific object. The second principle is form, the defining essence and structure that actualizes that raw material into a distinct identity. This dynamic solved the ancient paradox of change. A sculptor carving a bronze statue is not creating something out of nothing. They are taking existing matter and transitioning it from a state of potentiality into actuality. By proving that underlying material retains its identity while receiving new form, Aristotle established the physical world as a stable, measurable, and knowable reality. Moving from the workshop to the broader society of the Athenian marketplace, he argued that achieving true episteme requires answering the question of why an object exists in 4 distinct ways. Take the construction of a house. The material cause consists of the timber and stone. The formal cause is the architectural design that defines it as a shelter. The efficient cause is the builder, the active agent who triggers the construction process. Finally, there is the final cause, or telos. This is the ultimate purpose or goal the object is designed to fulfill. This framework extends even to human art. The final cause of a tragic play, for example, is to evoke pity and fear, achieving a specific emotional catharsis for the audience. Reality under this system is not a sequence of random events. It is a network of intentional, goal-directed processes that can be strictly categorized. Aristotle applied this precise causal framework directly to raw nature, conducting detailed empirical observations of biology. By examining a developing chick egg, he tracked the physical mechanics of life as it took shape in real time. He documented epigenesis, the hierarchical development of an organism from potential to actual, beginning with the initial formation of the heart. In living creatures, he observed that the formal, efficient, and final causes often merge. The biological shape of the animal, the parent that generated it, and its ultimate function all align into a singular drive to survive. Biological life demonstrates that nature possesses its own internal teleology. Organisms naturally strive towards their fully actualized state, without requiring an external designer to shape them. If every physical entity requires a cause to transition from potential to actual, it raises a final question. What drives the motion of the cosmic system as a whole? This diagram shows the prevailing astronomical model of the era, a nested architecture of crystalline spheres containing the planets and stars. Because an infinite regress of causes is impossible, Aristotle reasoned there must be a terminus, an absolute boundary that anchors the physical chain of motion. He identified this first cause as the unmoved mover. It is defined as an entity of pure, immaterial actuality, possessing zero potentiality and therefore entirely immune to change itself. It does not exert physical force. Instead, it causes motion by serving as the ultimate object of cosmic desire, drawing all matter and celestial bodies toward their highest state of perfection. Aristotle successfully linked the strict rules governing human logic to the raw matter of the earth, the biological development of animals, and the mechanical limits of the universe. In doing so, he replaced a worldview of unpredictable chaos with a fully intelligible anatomy of existence, driven by inherent purpose and bound together by an unbroken chain of causes. By the 9th century, while Western Europe's great libraries largely lay in ruins, a massive translation effort was underway in the Middle East. At the center of the Abbasid Caliphate was the House of Wisdom. Here, scholars sought out the surviving works of the Greeks, carefully translating them into Arabic. Among the most prized were the texts of Aristotle, known to these scholars as Aristu, or simply the first teacher. Early Islamic thinkers like Al-Kindi didn't just preserve these texts, they put them to work. Aristotle offered a rigorous, systematic method of logic. For scholars examining mathematics, astronomy, and nature, this framework provided the ultimate tool for structuring human thought. But this logic carried a built-in theological crisis. Aristotle's physical treatises argued that the universe and matter were eternal, operating without a beginning or end. Abrahamic scriptures, however, spoke of a singular point of creation, a world brought into existence from absolute nothingness. This presented an immense problem. To accept the first teacher's physics completely meant contradicting the foundational premise of faith, but rejecting his logic meant abandoning the most powerful tool for scientific inquiry available to them. This irreconcilable gap initiated a multi-century debate. Over the next several hundred years, the brightest minds in the Islamic world would engage in an intellectual war, testing whether human reason and divine revelation could occupy the same space without destroying one another. Thinkers like Al-Farabi and Avicenna took on the challenge. Rather than discard Aristotle, they built massive intellectual systems that adapted his Greek framework to an Islamic worldview. Avicenna's most significant innovation was a subtle metaphysical distinction. He separated essence, what a thing actually is, from existence, the fact that it is. In his system, the universe could operate on Aristotle's physical laws, but its existence still relied entirely on a necessary, uncaused creator. This elegant compromise didn't hold. By the late 11th century, Orthodox theologians identified these philosophical workarounds as a severe threat. Leading the charge was the brilliant scholar Al-Ghazali. Al-Ghazali studied the philosophers extensively, mastering their logic solely to dismantle it. He published a scathing critique titled The Incoherence of the Philosophers, methodically exposing the limits and contradictions within their Aristotelian reasoning. Al-Ghazali branded the philosophers with infidelity on 3 claims: an eternal world, asserting divine knowledge excludes individual objects, and denying physical resurrection. Tying the universe to physical laws bound God to cause and effect. To him, nature acts only because God constantly wills it. The argument was devastating. By framing unchecked rationalism as a direct challenge to God's absolute power, Al-Ghazali left Aristotelian philosophy cornered. It had to either find a bulletproof theological defense or face eradication from Islamic intellectual life entirely. The response to this crisis didn't come from Baghdad, but from the far western edge of the Islamic world, the courts of 12th century Andalusia, in modern-day Spain. Here, a jurist and philosopher named Ibn Rushd, known in the West as Averroes, mounted a counter-offensive. He wrote voluminous commentaries to correct past misinterpretations of Aristotle and fired back at Al-Ghazali with his own book, The Incoherence of the Incoherence. Averroes built his defense on a single logical pillar: if God is truth and philosophy is the pursuit of truth, then they cannot contradict. Since there is only one truth, both paths must ultimately lead to the exact same destination. He argued that apparent contradictions happen because Scripture speaks in allegories meant for the common person, while philosophy uses demonstrative logic meant for scholars. They are simply 2 different dialects describing the exact same underlying reality. Despite his rigorous arguments, his works gained little traction against the theological dominance of Al-Ghazali in the East. But as his influence waned at home, Latin translations of his extensive commentaries began crossing the Pyrenees. Averroes inadvertently became a vital bridge. By fiercely defending Aristotle against theological attacks, he preserved the pure texts and packaged them with rigorous analytical tools, handing them directly to an awakening Christian Europe. By the 13th century, a flood of Arabic and Greek manuscripts arrived at the rapidly expanding University of Paris. Western scholars were suddenly exposed to the full weight of Aristotelian thought. The Catholic Church recognized the exact same threat Al-Ghazali had. Fearful that pagan logic would unravel Christian doctrine, authorities moved to ban Aristotle. But a Dominican friar named Thomas Aquinas stepped into the fracture. Aquinas refused to reject reason out of fear. He believed that denying the natural truths discovered by philosophers would be an insult to the Creator who designed the human intellect. His mission was to systematically fuse Christian theology with Aristotelian metaphysics. To accomplish this, he tackled the most difficult paradox, the relationship between the mortal body and the immortal soul. He reached for a specific Aristotelian concept called hylomorphism, the theory that every physical object is a compound of raw matter and organizing form. Aquinas argued that the soul is not an alien entity trapped in a physical vessel. Instead, the soul is the substantial form of the human body. Just as the shape of a blade makes steel into a knife, the soul organizes matter into a living person. They are intrinsically designed to exist as a single, unified entity. Because the soul is the organizing principle, it survives physical death. But crucially, Aquinas used Aristotle's logic to show that a soul without its body is an incomplete substance. It naturally awaits a reunion with matter, brilliantly aligning with the Christian doctrine of bodily resurrection. Through rigorous, step-by-step logic, Aquinas neutralized the threat. He proved that faith and observation could work in tandem, effectively turning the pagan philosopher into the foundational pillar of Orthodox Christian theology. The dialectical method, sharpened through these centuries of friction, became an enduring mental toolkit, capable of analyzing any system from planetary motion to political law. By requiring every physical observation to fit a logical proof, these scholars turned the study of nature into a repeatable, rule-bound discipline. This drive to categorize the world according to cause and effect forced the human mind to treat physical evidence as the final arbiter of truth, the essential prerequisite for the modern scientific method. Empires collapsed, libraries were destroyed, and dogmas shifted. Yet the texts and the ideas did not burn with them. They were passed in a centuries-long relay race of human intellect across the Middle East, North Africa, and Europe. From Al-Kindi and Avicenna, to Al-Ghazali and Averroes, to Aquinas, each thinker tightened the logical threads. The philosophical framework we use today to categorize reality, practice science, and debate ethics is an inheritance from this unbroken chain. Aristotle's final legacy lies in this rigorous, unrelenting persistence, the refusal to accept the universe as a mystery, and the determination to interrogate it until it yields its secrets.